All right, the sexual education of children. I think one of the most important duties of parents to their children is to give them a healthy sexual education. And I find that this is pretty much never done in today's world. Usually what happens is when the child is about to enter puberty, they are handed a book by their parents because their parents do not feel comfortable about talking about the topic of sex with their children. And the parent is enforcing the idea on the child that I can't talk with my parents about sex because they didn't want to talk with me about it, they handed me a book. But the child gets this book and it answers some of their questions, but it doesn't answer all their questions. But obviously they can't talk to mom and dad about it because, you know, he just handed them a book, and there's been awkward situations a couple times when sexual things are brought up, and so they need to get their questions answered, but they can't ask mom or dad, so they go to the internet, or they go to their friends at school, or they go to some other source that they shouldn't get information from, and they ask them, and what ends up happening is they get a very bad sexual education. They could end up molested because they asked their uncle or something who they shouldn't have asked, but felt comfortable with. They could go on the internet, and then the child could become addicted to pornography and live this life of guilt. And I mean, it's just horrible. Okay, so again, like I said in the beginning, I think one of the most important things that parents can do is give their children a healthy sexual education. And in order to successfully accomplish this, I came up with a list of 5 different points that I do believe need to be inculcated in order to be successful at that, okay? So here we go. Rule number 1, you need to be comfortable with yourself. If you try to talk with your children about sex and you're kind of like, you don't want to use the word sex, and you don't want to use the word penis, you don't want to use the word vagina, and you're kind of like, and you're not comfortable in your own skin, you know, breathing the air in your own house, then your child's not going to feel comfortable listening to you. And it's going to make it an unpleasant experience for him, and he's going to try to avoid that experience. And so, yeah, you don't want to do that. You want your child to feel like they can talk to you about sexual things and ask you questions, so that way they don't ask the internet. Okay, so you need to foster an atmosphere where they want to and feel comfortable talking with you about it. So 1, you need to be comfortable with yourself. You need to just say these words out loud, and I mean, whatever it takes, you got to loosen up and realize it's okay to say these words. It's okay to talk about sex, and it's not a problem, okay? That's critical. So that's point number 1. You need to learn to be comfortable with yourself, or your child's not going to feel comfortable with you, and we'll try to avoid the discussion, to avoid the experience of being uncomfortable, okay? So that's point number 1. Point number 2. Answer every question. If your child comes to you with a question that is sexual and requires a sexual answer, then you need to answer it. Because if they became curious enough to ask you, they're thinking about it in their head, okay? And if you do not answer that question, that doesn't make them forget their question. That just makes them probably a little frustrated, and they still want to know, and makes them, they're going to try to get their answer a different means, from a different source. So if you do not answer their question, it's not going to make them forget their question, it's just going to make them look for their answer somewhere else. So if they ask you a question, you need to answer it, because they're already thinking about it, and you not answering it is not going to get it out of their head. In fact, if you don't answer their question, I will bet you that they will probably think about it even more, just because you won't answer them. It's like, well, what are my parents hiding from me? Why do they not want to talk with me about this? Blah, 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 blah. So if they ask you a question, no matter how much you may not want to talk about that specific thing that they may be asking about, because it's really like detailed and like, why are you thinking about this, child? You still need to answer it. Because if you don't, it's going to cause more problems in the long run. So if your child asks a question, you need to answer it, because they're not going to forget their question, and they're already thinking about it since they ask, and if you don't ask it, they're going to think about it more, and they're going to look for their answer from a different source. So you need to be comfortable with yourself, and you need to answer every question that they ask you. Rule number 3, you need to foster relaxed discussion. See, you don't want to, okay, well, I need to have the talk with you, Jimmy, so I need you to sit here, and Jimmy's like, oh, you know, and he's hearing all these things he's never heard in his life, and he feels weird and awkward. This isn't going to work, because you want to create an atmosphere where your child feels comfortable talking with you about sex and approaching you about it. And here you're making them feel weird because you sat them in this chair and it's like they're in trouble. They feel like they're in trouble. Like, what did I do? You know. And so what happens is it's making it uncomfortable for the child. You need to foster relaxed discussion around this topic. You don't have to necessarily sit down with your child and have the talk with them. What you do is you just be normal, or what I want to say would be more normal, or should be more normal perhaps. Just mention things in passing to your spouse. I really enjoyed sex with you last night, honey. And your child will hear that. And they will hear sex spoken about in a relaxed discussion. They weren't part of the conversation. They heard it. They learned that it's okay to talk with it. And so when they have a question, they don't mind asking mom and dad, because they could see that mom and dad were okay and comfortable in talking about it, and they weren't sat down in a chair like they were in trouble and talked to and all this awkwardness and uncomfortableness, okay? So you can just mention things in passing. It doesn't even have to have anything to do with them. Or you could ask them a question, or they could say something and you could relate it somehow to sex. So just talk and act like it's not this big super secret thing, because it's really not. And if it is, then it's probably a problem, and somebody's may have some fanatical strains in there. I mean, I can understand why people feel awkward, because it's a private thing and it involves intenseness and so forth, but you're not helping your child by being this way. And you're not helping yourself either. There are some adults that don't want to talk to other adults about sex. And I'm not saying that they should just talk about it like loosely and lascivious manners, because this is a problem. So I'm not encouraging that. But we're adults. I mean, we can talk about it. You know how much the Bible talks about sex? Do you know how detailed sometimes the Bible is about sex? And we're all here like, well, you can't say the word sex. You see? And this is not helping the children. It's bad for us. It's bad for the children. So we need to stop that. So we need to foster relaxed discussion. Rule number 4, we need to be frank with our children. Use the words penis, and use the word vagina, and use the word sex and blowjob, whatever words you need to use to relay it in a way so they will know what things mean. Just say it and be frank and just be blunt, because if you try to say things, well, he kind of, stuck his thing and did this and then they're gonna, that's not, again, it's not making it easy for the child. If you're frank with them, they'll be frank with you, okay? And this is what you want. You want your child to feel like they can come to you and be frank. Hey, when I was at church, I saw this, that these people were doing, or I heard this. And if you don't use plain words, and if you kind of are awkward and don't feel comfortable saying direct things about penises and vaginas and ejaculation and semen around your child and with them, then they're going to be kind of talking to you that way too, if they'll even do it to begin with. So you need to be frank. Just say it. Don't act like it's some big sin to say these words, because it's not, okay? It's just fine. And lastly, rule number 5, we want to gauge the child's education wisely. See, 5-year-old children do not need to know anything about oral sex or blowjob, okay? They do not need to know about that. However, if they are in a situation such as public school, where they are going to be around evil associates that talk about evil things and do evil things, it would be better for you to talk with your child about it first, so they can get the education from a healthy source instead of hearing it first from their promiscuous and lascivious and fornicating friends at school. Does that make sense? So a 5-year-old girl does not need to know what a blowjob is, okay? A 12-year-old girl does not need to know what a blowjob is, and honestly, I don't see that there's any real reason that a 16-year-old girl needs to know what a blowjob is. However, by the time she's 16, she's going to have found out anyway, so it's better if she hears it from you, because, and this is for the parents out there that have children, like a 16-year-old daughter. Okay, so there's a question for you. Does your 16-year-old daughter know what a blowjob is? And then my next question is, Who taught her? And how did she learn it? Was she taught by the sex ed teacher at school? Did they hand out condoms in that classroom? Because that actually does happen. So was it orally taught to her, or was she asked to perform it? Did she learn it from her boyfriend or or one of her girlfriends? I mean, and I know that if I was to ask these questions directly to a parent of a 16-year-old girl, they would probably feel very uncomfortable. Why? Because the reality is their daughter probably knows what that is and probably learned from a bad source, and they didn't first hear it from mom and dad because mom and dad were unfaithful to their child. And it's not because they were trying to be that way. I understand we're all kind of products of what we were raised and the way that our parents were and the way that our parents taught us, but we're going to have to break the system because children are not growing up with a healthy sexual education and it's causing problems. So we need to gauge the education of our children wisely. Don't tell them things before they need to know, but understand that the circumstances of their life and their associates may require you to say things before they do. So this is a lot of things to keep in mind, but it's really important that we teach our kids properly, because if a 12-year-old girl goes to somebody in school and asks what a blowjob is, and they say, "Here, I'll show you," and she kind of goes along with it because she doesn't know what's happening, and then suddenly she ends up in this situation and she's like, "Oh dear," and she doesn't feel like she can talk to mom and dad about it because she couldn't ask mom and dad anything to begin with, and so she's molested by her teacher or or something else. I mean, this is horrible. This is utterly horrible, and a lot of times it's the parents' fault. So we need to stop this. I'm going to rehearse these rules real quick all over again. Rule number 1, you need to be comfortable with yourself so your children can be comfortable with you. You need to answer every question they ask because they're not going to forget it. They're going to think about it more, and they're going to look for a different source for their answers. You need to speak about it in a relaxed atmosphere, like it's okay to talk about this, so that way they'll feel like they can talk to you about it because, it's not a big deal, okay? And you need to be frank, because if you're always trying to avoid, you don't really want to say that, but that's really what it is, and you're like, what kind of stuff comes out of his penis and all this weirdness? I mean, you're gonna make it difficult for them. So be frank. And rule number 5, you want to gauge their education wisely. Don't teach them things that they don't need to know before it's time for them to know, but understand that their circumstances and associates may require you to tell them things that they really do not need to know at that age, but should, because it's better for you to tell them first than for somebody else. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in the next presentation.